was one of those days where the sky seemed determined to pour its heart out. The clouds were thick and heavy, and you could feel the tension in the air as though the world was holding its breath. It was the kind of weather that made you rethink every plan you had for the day. A day better spent curled up indoors, watching the rain beat down on the windows. But life doesn't always give us the luxury to choose, does it? She didn't have a choice either. Mia, a woman in her mid-20s, was caught in the middle of the city with no shelter in sight. She was juggling work deadlines, personal commitments, and trying to stay afloat in a world that constantly demanded more from her. Life for Mia was a balancing act. She had always been good at keeping it together until that day. Mia had been rushing down the street, her arms full of shopping bags, when the first drops began to fall. She quickened her pace, hoping she could beat the rain, but soon the sky unleashed its fury. Within minutes, the rain turned into a full-fledged downpour. She looked around frantically, but there was nowhere to hide. Her heart sank as she realized she was going to be drenched. And then, just as she was about to give in to the rain, an umbrella appeared over her head. Standing next to her, holding the umbrella with a calm, almost amused expression, was a man. His name was Ryan. Ryan wasn't the kind of person who usually went out of his way for strangers, but something about Mia caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she looked so determined to fight the rain, even though she clearly had no chance of winning. Or maybe it was the fact that he had nowhere else to be, and sharing an umbrella with a stranger seemed like the least complicated decision he could make that day. Ryan was the opposite of Mia in many ways. Where Mia's life was a whirlwind of responsibilities, Ryan lived at his own pace. He was a freelance photographer, and his days were filled with the unpredictability of capturing moments that others often missed. To Ryan, life was about spontaneity, finding beauty in the chaos. And in that moment, in the middle of a city soaked in rain, he found something beautiful in Mia's frazzled determination. For a few moments, they stood in silence under the umbrella, the sound of the rain drowning out the noise of the city around them. It was one of those rare moments where time seemed to slow down, and for a brief second, it felt as though the rest of the world didn't matter.
Thank you,
Mia finally managed to say, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of embarrassment in it, as though she wasn't used to accepting help from others. Ryan smiled, a lopsided grin that made him look both charming and slightly awkward at the same time. No problem, it's not exactly the kind of weather you want to face alone. They began walking together, Mia adjusting her pace to match Ryan's leisurely stride. At first, the silence felt a little uncomfortable, as though both of them were unsure of what to say. But soon enough, the conversation started flowing naturally, like the rain that was now pouring around them. Mia learned that Ryan was a traveler of sorts, someone who rarely stayed in one place for too long. His photography had taken him to some of the most beautiful and sometimes dangerous places in the world. He told her about the time he almost got stranded on a mountain during a storm, a story that had her both horrified and laughing by the end of it. In return, Mia shared bits and pieces of her life. She told him about her career as a marketing executive, her dreams of one day starting her own business, and how she always felt like she was running against the clock. It was the kind of conversation that felt effortless, as though they had known each other for years instead of just a few minutes. As they reached the corner where their paths would diverge, Ryan stopped and held out the umbrella, offering it to Mia. "Here, you need this more than I do," he said. Mia hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, let alone a gesture like this. But something about Ryan's easygoing demeanor made her feel like it was okay to accept.
I can't take your umbrella.
She replied, but her hand was already reaching for it. Ryan shook his head. "Consider it a loan. Maybe we'll run into each other again and you can return it." They said their goodbyes, and as Mia watched Ryan walk away, disappearing into the rain, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loss. It was odd, considering they had only just met. But there was something about that brief encounter that stayed with her long after she had reached the safety of her apartment. Days passed, and Mia found herself thinking about Ryan more often than she would like to admit. The city was big, and the odds of running into him again seemed slim, but life has a funny way of bringing people together when they least expect it. 1 week later, Mia found herself in the same part of town, the memory of that rainy day still fresh in her mind. As she walked past the spot where they had shared the umbrella, she glanced around, half expecting to see Ryan standing there, as if by some stroke of fate. And then, as if the universe had heard her unspoken wish, there he was. Ryan stood across the street, a camera slung over his shoulder, staring up at the sky with that same lopsided grin she remembered. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She crossed the street, her steps quickening as she got closer. When Ryan finally noticed her, his face lit up with recognition. "Well, look who it is," he said, a playful tone in his voice. "I was starting to think I'd never get my umbrella back." Mia smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest despite the cool breeze that tugged at her hair. Their reunion wasn't grand or overly dramatic. It wasn't filled with tears or sweeping declarations of love. It was simple, quiet, and somehow perfect. They picked up where they had left off, as though no time had passed at all. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Mia and Ryan's connection deepened. They were still two very different people, with lives that often pulled them in opposite directions. But somehow, they made it work. They found solace in each other's company, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, their lives began to intertwine. And every now and then, when the rain would start to fall, Mia would look back on that day, the day a shared umbrella had brought two strangers together, and she would smile. Because sometimes love starts in the most unexpected places.